The British Library's paper money collections, there's about 6,000 pieces of paper money located throughout the library. And the material itself is global in coverage. It can be patchy in parts, and some areas are better represented than others, but it is a global collection. And chronologically, the material extends from the kind of 13th century onwards to the second half of the 20th century. It covers every aspect of the security printing processes involved in paper money production for that period. And the majority of the library's paper money collections form part of the official security printing archives, which makes them quite unique. And if you can see the image now, I hope you can, what we have here is one which was found in the city of Koto, which was once a stronghold of the Tanga Empire before it fell to the armies of Genghis Khan in about 1224. The banknote is actually in two separate pieces in the Chinese section, and it dates from the 13th century. So, at the British Library, the major collections of significance for kind of people interested in paper money are housed in four sections. So the Philatelic Collections, where I work, the India Office Records, the Chinese section, the Printed Heritage sections. And the largest portion of materials found in my collection, and that includes the Perkins-Bacon Paper Money Collection, which we'll talk about in a moment, the Board of Inland Revenue Stamping Department Archive, which has the Treasury Note material, the Crown Agent's Philatelic and Security Printing Archive, which Jonathan alluded to earlier, and then the Foreign and Commonwealth Office collections, which we'll discuss in a little while as well. Outside of our collection, within the India Office records, there's also a significant paper money archive in the Finance Department records in the IOR LF7 series. In the Chinese sections, they have the earliest Yuan Dynasty banknote coupled with some Ming and Qing Dynasty material. And in the Printed Heritage section, there's a range of paper money, including kind of 18th century French assignats, colonial American banknotes, and Mafeking siege notes. So that's just to give you an idea of where most of this material is. So, turning to Indian paper money now. Prior to 1861, the responsibility for the production of paper money in India fell on the individual banks of issue. And we don't actually have very much material for this period at all, but the exception is the Perkins-Bacon Paper Money Collection. And this collection houses about 72 kind of banknotes, paper money, so including essays, proof material and specimen material. Throughout the library and around the world, most people tend to, when they hear the name Perkins-Bacon, think of the world's first adhesive postage stamp, the penny black shown here, as well as other early kind of colonial stamp issues. I'm always keen to point out that actually they were banknote printers first and foremost. And within our collection, there are two pieces of Indian paper money. So the first piece here is the Bank of Bombay 1846 to 1854 100 rupee note, and you'll notice it looks a bit tatty. You've got to bear in mind it's a working archive. You'll notice kind of annotations identifying the languages of particular text which the printers are put in addition to in the date section the remark pattern 26th of April 1852. And that's then followed by this unadopted Bank of Bombay 1857,000 rupee note. It's just the obverse face here. You'll notice at the bottom of it that the East India Company's coats of arms have been replaced with those of the armorial bearings of the British government. And that's because this was being produced around in the immediate aftermath of the Indian War of Independence / Indian Mutiny, when the British Crown begins to take over the direct colonial administration of the East India Company's territories. And of course, it wasn't issued or you know, it was unadopted because a few years later in 1861, the government of India decides to take over the production of Indian currency notes. Which brings me on to the next and most important collection for anybody interested in Indian paper money. And that is that like we found in the India Office records. which are housed at the British Library, and I used to work with them. It comprises 9 kilometres of records covering all aspects of British trade, colonialism and empire in regions east of the Cape of Good Hope between 1600 and 1848. And it's a complex amalgamation of the archives of the various East India companies that were trading in India and throughout Asia, as well as a Whitehall department called the Board of Commissioners for the Affairs of India that was set up to kind of monitor their activities from the late 18th century onwards. From after the Indian War of Independence stroke mutiny, the Crown takes over the administration. There's a government department set up at home in the UK in Whitehall called the India Office, and they absorb the earlier archives and then build their own between 1858 and 1947. In addition to that, you've got the records of the Burma office within them, which is kind of a 11-year period from 1937 to 1948. And we also actively collect papers for organisations and officials who were active in these parts of the world for that time. And they're not official government archives like the ones I've just discussed, but they're highly complementary. And within this 9 miles of records, there's almost 1,000 original specimens and about 100 record files relating to currency notes and their production and distribution for use in India and Burma. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an overview of all those major files so you get a real good idea of what's held. What I find really exciting about this collection is it's probably the most complete paper money archive publicly accessible in the world. Starting off on the left, you can often see the shelf mark and the date range, and often the kind of range of themes that are in there. So you can see that the files and paperwork include things like the consumption currency notes, the changes in the form and colouring of the currency notes, the use of signatures and inks and the dating and the notes, as well as kind of various means to deal with counterfeiting. You also find often things like the shipping arrangements for currency notes to places like Karachi, Lahore, Cawnpore and Calcutta via Bombay, as well as the estimates for manufacturing the notes by English firms and reports by the home government experts. You'll find as well that there's often a range of notes looking at compensation for losses during the war, as well as the introduction of new denominations and values, in addition to kind of communication with international governments, dealing with kind of keeping an eye on international currency exchanges and the use of rupees overseas. You'll often find as well there's really detailed papers there with the Bank of England and portals and company for the expenses of the notes. Quite some very interesting disputes between the India office, the Bank of England and portals regarding the cost of them. And also the biggest fear of any banknote producer or manufacturer, counterfeiting. So there's some really amazing material there looking at the prohibition of handkerchiefs with facsimiles of currency in Zanzibar and Ceylon, looking at substitutions for kind of mold-made paper and paper alternatives, kind of something that we're going through a period of great change with the introduction of polymer notes, as well as details on the scripts to be used, what languages are to be used on the notes, and often details of the people who were responsible for producing the translations. A few of them were professors at the School of Oriental and African Studies, for example. And then buried within these files, and often people will say to me, oh, have you got this note? Have you got that note in the archive? And it's really not that easy to identify what we've got. When I was cataloguing these in my old role, I was not allowed to catalogue the individual banknotes. It was literally just the files, and interleaved among them, you'll often find these specimens. But there are a few stunning volumes. So, for example, the LF7383, which has all the design proofs for the 50, 105 rupee notes in 1926, as well as new designs, unadopted designs, which we'll go on again with later. You'll find in the files as well stuff relating to the shipment of the paper money from England to India. And in this case, with file LF7393, you could see there's there's actually 2 or 3 files looking at the loss of currency notes with the sinking of the SS Egypt, which was full of bullion as well. Again, you've got files there on the universalization proposals for currency notes. The initial currency notes were centered around circles or presidencies, so they were for local kind of use. But over time, they become more and more, especially the uniface notes, they become more and more universalized and used and spread. There is one file there, the LF7400, currency note forgeries in Iraq and Hijaz. Before you get excited, I did check the Hijaz. There's no Hijaz notes in there, so sadly not. Again, we have details on forgeries places like Brazil, as well as material looking at the redesign of notes. So you can see the files are incredibly comprehensive. And what, really do tell the story of the specific objects themselves. I'm moving on a bit because it's a lot of text and I know it gets a bit boring. So what I want to do is show you the material you would encounter in this archive. I'm not going to show you the notes as issued because for the 3rd collection I could do that, but I want to show the type of rarities and treasures that this archive contains. So here we have 2 plaster cast sculptures bearing kind of the profile effigy of George V by the sculptor Sir Bertram McKennell, which were used on currency notes and coinage of India. And these were produced around 1911. And moving on, you can see here we have a handmade essay for an unissued George V India portrait series, 10,000 rupee note. And at the top, that portrait there, that engraved portrait is actually based on the plaster cast you've just seen. And there's also a colour trial here for an unadopted Government of India George V portrait series 50 rupee note, designed by Sir John Simpson in 1925. And beside that, we have a workup, kind of proof for the portrait, which was kind of based on the other plaster cast used for the coinage. You'll also find in here things like blueprints and specimen watermark paper for the Government of India kind of George V portrait series. This one here is for the kind of 1923 10 rupee note, as well as kind of a schematic diagram showing the kind of colour tint range that was to be adopted on a 100 rupee note designed by Sir John Simpson in 1925, which wasn't actually issued. In addition to kind of the working materials and the essays and the proofs, we also have unadopted designs. So here, from one of the early files I was discussing earlier about the change of colour, we have an unadopted Government of India uniface 50 rupee note with a purple underprint, and this was made in 1911. And of course, that colour was never adopted. And it's followed by this one of several stunning colour trials for an unadopted George V portrait series 5 rupee note that was made by Sir John Simpson around 1920, 1921. Actually, no one knew these existed before I started cataloguing the record some time back. You also have unadopted designs for the Government of India George V portrait series 10 rupee note, as well as the 5 rupee note here, and they were made by Sir John Simpson around the same time, 1920, 1921. To give you some flavour of the records, and I've discussed some of these in previous talks, although this archive deals with the production of Indian paper money, it actually houses an impressive world collection from around the period just prior to the First World War. What we have here are 2 letters sent from the Secretary of State at the India office to the Under Secretary of State at the Colonial office and the Foreign office, requesting them to get specimen paper money from various banks and countries around the world that were going to be used to basically improve these uniface underprint notes into the first kind of portrait series designs. And again, this material is housed in 2 volumes, but it has some stunning rarities in them. So it had this kind of Dominion of Canada 1900-1918 series $50,000 note that was printed by the American Banknote Company at Ottawa, as well as a Commonwealth of Australia 1913 issue £1,000 note that was printed by T.S. Harrison. Sadly, the left-hand margin of these notes has been glued. They've been pasted down into books, working books, so it wasn't possible for me to get the reverse faces of these or decent shots. And the same holds true here for the National Bank of Scotland 1908-1914 issue £100 note that was printed by Waterloo and Sons, a truly stunning note. And the Deutsche Asiatische Bank Shanghai 1907 series 20 tail note was printed by the firm Gazzaica and Devrient. In addition to the main body of material dealing with Indian paper currency, there's a range of complementary files. So within the IOR LF7 series, you'll find stuff relating to paper currency reserves, but you'll also find files and records relating to the establishment of the Nasik printing press in India, which eventually took over the production of Indian paper money. And this was a beautiful kind of piece of publicity material that is in one of the LF7 files, discussing the creation and early years of the Nasik printing press as it was being set up, which I thought I would share with you. So that gives you a rough idea of the kind of scope and range of material, and it really is vast. There's thousands of pages of material, and there's a whole range of thousands of pages of records and hundreds of kind of objects like this. But I do hope it'll give you a good flavour of the totality of the archive. I'd like to move on now to the final collection that's of relevance for Indian paper money. And again, that's housed in my department, Philatelic Collections, and it's the Foreign and Commonwealth Office collection. Now, this is an official reference collection of postal stationery stamps, currency and banknote specimens that were used in the conduct of official business. And within this collection, there's a total of around 50 currency and banknotes that were issued in India, Burma, Ceylon and Cyprus between kind of 1870 to the demonetisation of the last series in the 1950s. And 35 of these specimens were issued by the Government of India and the Reserve Bank of India for use in kind of India, Pakistan and Burma between kind of 1947 up to independence. And again, you'll find a lot, not all of this material, particularly the Reserve Bank of India material, but you'll find a lot of this material duplicated as well in the kind of India Office record collections. So it includes kind of a complete set of the Government of India uniface notes with underprints issued kind of between 1918 and 1927. The India Office records that we've just discussed also house this material, but earlier examples. I think the earliest one I've seen is a 10,000 rupee note dated in 1899. But we have a comprehensive set between the FCO and the India Office collections. We also have the Government of India George V portrait series, in use between 1918 and 1940. So the 1 rupees, the first and second series, and the 2 rupees 8 anna. And again, this kind of complements what's in the IOR, except in the IOR you've got a lot more. So we have these in kind of sheets or booklets, various essays of them as well. And then, of course, moving up the denominations for the George V, we have the various 5 rupees and first 10 rupee kind of Government of India George V portrait series. And then, again, just moving upwards here, we have some of the 10 rupees up to the first 50 rupee. And then the hundreds going up to the 1,000 and the 10,000 rupee. These particular ones are housed. I'd like to get some conservation done on these when things are back to normal. They're housed in a booklet that's quite acidic, and the corners are quite fragile to handlings. But I'm hoping that'll be remedied quite quickly so we can get these ready for the public. Moving on, we've got a single example of a Government of India George VI portrait series 1 rupee, and of course the first kind of sets for the Reserve Bank of India, so the 2 rupee and the 5 rupee. And then again, moving up the denomination, we've got the various kind of series of 5 and 10 rupee issues between kind of 1938 and their final demonetization in 1957. Likewise, again, moving right the way up from the 100 to the 1,000 to the 10,000 rupee. I love the 10,000 rupee. It's got to be one of my favourite notes in the collection. In addition to the main kind of Government Reserve Bank of India material, we also have a complete run, well, I'll say a complete run, but we have a set of the Reserve Bank of India Burma series that was kind of first released in, I think, 1938 and again demonetized around 1950. So these were printed in Nasi. Again, we've got here the low denomination rupees going up to the 100 rupees and then ending off with the 1,000 and 10,000 rupee. One or two of these notes as well, that they have like presidency type printing, so you've got Bengal material, Bombay. There is one example of a note for Karachi in there, and there's also a couple of emergency issues that are in this collection. So by and large, you know, a very comprehensive set. I'm going to end it there because, like I say, it's a huge subject that I could take hours on, but I think you now have a good idea of the kind of files you'd expect, the subject matter you'd expect to encounter, and more importantly for the collector, the material.